I continue to challenge myself to paint in a grimdark style without the use of washes, enamels, oils, or solvents. Don't get me wrong, I love to use oils and enamels in my painting and I've used them quite extensively. However, there's already so much great grimdark content out there using oil washes and enamels and that sort of thing that I thought I would try something different. And who knows, maybe I can encourage someone to try grimdark for the first time using the acrylic supplies that they already own. Or maybe I'll get flooded with comments saying that this isn't even grimdark. Either way, I'm having fun and this is how I've chosen to paint my miniatures for Grimcoven. Let's get started. Welcome to Trehane Miniatures. I'm using the usual dark blue primer for this miniature, and I plan to have 3 light sources affecting this character. I'll paint the front of the character as if natural light is coming from the upper right side. I'll paint the back with a moonlight glow. And I'll paint some red OSL as if it's coming from below the character on its left side. The moonlight glow and red OSL will be painted very quickly, leaving me with only about 1/3 of the miniature to spend any real time on. The base layer of the moonlight gets a very quick and very light coat of Vallejo Azure through an airbrush. This is mostly done so I can see where the moonlight would affect the corrupted Gunslinger. I'll place more detailed highlights with a standard brush in a bit. Then I do the same with Dragon Red, spraying the paint from below the miniature. This application of paint is heavier than what I previously achieved with the moonlight because I want the red OSL to be quite intense. I intensify the moonlight glow by deliberately placing azure highlights. I have previously mentioned that I was going to eliminate the moonlight glow from these Grimcoven miniatures, and I still may do that for some. But for now, I decide to reduce the intensity of the blue and give the moonlight another go. This azure color seems like a cold blue color, and I think it's a fitting match for the dark atmosphere of this game. This quick 2-step process is all it takes to essentially paint half of the miniature. Compared to the moonlight, the red OSL has 2 additional steps that are pretty quick as well. First, I intensify the red with Scarlet Blood Game Color. This is painted on downward facing bits and is applied within the red foundation that we established with the airbrush. Then I hit the edges as well as some prominent features with titanium white. If you want to save some time, you can apply these white highlights directly over the airbrush portion of the red OSL and then use a single coat of Scarlet Blood over the white and some of the surrounding areas. I do one more pass with Scarlet Blood over these titanium white highlights. This should make the red OSL pop. With the moonlight and red OSL finished, we can get to the real painting. This technique for painting a miniature is more than just a shortcut. It produces distinctive looking miniatures that stand apart from what so many other gamers paint. But mostly it's a great shortcut. I'm taking a page out of the Dead General's book by using mahogany through an airbrush to set up the naturally lit portion of the Gunslinger. I wasn't planning to do this when I initially prepped this mini, but it worked so well with the Undead General that I decided to incorporate it here as well. What I like about using the brown through an airbrush is that it creates a natural drop-off into the dark blue shadows, and I can start building my highlights directly over this dark brown layer. Then I use a mix of mahogany and Vallejo salmon rose to paint the skin. This starts out as a fairly basic approach to painting skin. I use a 50-50 mix of mahogany and salmon rose to paint over the pure mahogany base layer. What I like about this mix is that the mahogany has a very creamy consistency for an air paint, which is helping tone down some of the chalkiness that can be present with light flesh tones like this salmon rose. After just a couple of layers, this is looking very smooth. Next, I simply add detailed highlights with pure salmon rose. This is the final step for the basic skin look. Later on, I'll randomly dab in some blue and green hues to give the skin a more sickly look. This Gunslinger is corrupted after all, so pristine flesh isn't the look we're going for. This is my first time using this recipe and I came up with it on the fly. I'll have to remember this because I think this makes an outstanding barbarian skin recipe. Following the game art, I want to have smoke effects pouring from the gun barrels. I use a small drill bit to drill out the 2 gun barrels from where I want the smoke to emanate. I'm doing this now because I'm about to paint the Gunslinger's firearms and I don't want to screw up the paint with the drill process. I'm not usually the gun barrel drilling type, but it'll make sense here in just a minute. Then I take some dirty down rust, shake the crap out of it, and then warm it and the miniature in front of a small space heater until they're both warm to the touch. This is to help ensure that the dirty down rust blooms properly. I've skipped this step in the past and the result was 0 rust effect. I'm using this rust to slather all of the metal bits with rust before applying the metallic paints. This isn't the most rewarding way to paint rust, but it is one of the fastest. I'll let the dirty down rust bloom properly and dry completely before continuing. This only takes a few minutes. I'm using Artist Loft bronze metallic paint and the Army Painter gunmetal paint to finish up both weapons. I'm painting all of the accent pieces of the guns with bronze. I use gunmetal only for the gun barrels and the chains hanging from the Gunslinger's trench coat. I paint the cloak, boots, and pants with a simple progression of gray paints. This is a fairly straightforward progression, but I'll cover the 3rd step in a little more detail because it's different than what I usually do with gray items. And it is an improvement. First, I use Necromancer Cloak as a basic layer over the mahogany that was airbrushed into place. Nothing more to see here. For the next 2 layers, I hit the edges, folds, and high points of the garments that would catch the natural light shining from the character's right side. These highlights are applied with short strokes and stippling to create the appearance of texture and wear. The final highlights are made up of a mix of the uniform gray midtone color and ice yellow. This is the step that I've changed and I'm very happy with it. I used to progress from uniform gray to ash gray, but that always looked too desaturated for my taste. The difference here is subtle but noticeable. I feel that using yellow in the mix creates a much more natural looking highlight. I think I may have to retire my bottle of ash gray at this point. While it's on my palette, I also use this mix of uniform gray and ice yellow to paint the corrupted Gunslinger's teeth. The final pieces of clothing to paint are the wraps on the forearms and the Gunslinger's hat. I'm painting both of these with the same formula, but I'll take the highlights on the hat a little further into the yellow range. I begin with a mix of mahogany and ochre brown. At this point, I'm already beginning to create some texture, and I'm careful not to cover all of the mahogany base layer. Just like I did with the trench coat, it's okay to paint over the protruding spiky bits. We'll take care of those later. I use pure ochre brown to create highlights on the arm wraps and hat. I leave the darker brown color showing in places where it makes sense, like the separation in the wraps. This is as bright as I'll make the highlights on the arm wraps. I'll save the brighter highlights for around the Gunslinger's head and upper torso. On the side of the hat, I paint striations with the ochre brown to give it a little more character. I think this will make it look more like a well-worn item than if I were to paint a single smooth highlight layer. The final highlight for the hat consists of a mix of ochre brown and ice yellow. I further accentuate the striations on the side of the hat. Then I dot in some little yellow highlights along the brim of the hat. Everything else is painted with necrotic flesh. This includes all of the spiky bits on the Gunslinger's arms and torso, the large tooth charms, the Gunslinger's nails and claws, the severed arm lying on the ground, and the animal skull. This first generation army paint is pretty translucent, so I'm able to build it up in a couple of layers without it looking too bright and intense. I still plan on dabbing in some green and blue shades as well as glazing in some red to make things look a little more gross. It'll be a subtle effect, but it should help create an appropriate atmosphere for this corrupted grimdark character. I'm using Army Green by the Army Painter and a goat hair dry brush to stipple in a little filth around the miniature. I'm focusing this mostly on the Gunslinger's flesh, the severed arm that's on the ground, and the ground itself. I'm trying to break up the uniform look of these features. In my opinion, adding random colors like this makes the Gunslinger look more like a living, breathing creature than a tiny plastic miniature. I also can't have a corrupted Gunslinger looking like he's all cleaned up and ready for a night on the town. I use Army Painter Crusted Sore, thinned with water, to glaze some color around the Gunslinger. I pay particular attention to the face. The skin around the face is thinner than other areas of the body, so the underlying blood is more visible in the creases and wrinkles. I also touch some around the elbows and fingers. I think that adding this to the protruding spikes of the arm wraps and shoulder area is a nice touch as well. It gives the feeling that these spikes recently sprouted forth due to the corrupting force of lament on the Gunslinger's battlefield. The final touch of color is stippling phthalo blue green shade on the Gunslinger's flesh and the severed arm. I add a relatively small amount of blue to the Gunslinger to add a little color variety to the skin. I am much more heavy-handed with the severed arm. This thing has not seen any blood flow for the better part of a day, so the bluer the better. And now for the final effect, I want to add a little smoke from the gun barrels. I use forceps to pluck some cotton fibers from the end of a cotton swab, because I don't have any cotton balls. I dab some regular liquid superglue onto one end of the cotton fibers. Then I use a toothpick to press it into the gun barrel. I've never tried this effect before, so if you have any tips for me on how to better accomplish this, I am all ears. The smoke looks pretty cool billowing straight up when it's initially placed, but I want it to reflect the game art, so I add a little more superglue to the top of the barrel and lay the cotton fibers back somewhat before allowing them to rise into the atmosphere. And we're all done. I'd like to thank my incredible channel members for supporting what I do on this channel. You too can become a channel member by using the link in the description and receive perks such as early access to videos, extended versions of our painting tutorials, and even a tier that lets you decide which miniature I paint next. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of corrupted heroes.